Hello friends, it's Chari. Today I have an interactive Get Whale card to share with you using the Tiny Gift Box Whale and Dolphin add-on. So I am going to be making a whale today. I've already cut out my pieces and he is a bright and colorful peacock cardstock whale. I will assemble him here in a little bit. And I'm using the reveal wheel to make my interactive card today. So for this card, I'm actually going to use the semicircle add-on and I'm just dropping that into place, that little puzzle piece. I always keep a piece of tape on mine that still has enough sticky to hold that in place. And I'm going to cut my panel out of some peach cardstock. In addition to the front panel being cut from peach cardstock, I'm also going to cut the wheel and the little circle that goes on the back. And it doesn't really matter what color the small circle is, but I want the wheel to match my background. Now for the waves for my whale, I wanted to use the new Giddy for gingham paper. This is a 12 by 12 so that gingham is very large. And I just cut two pieces with the bottom half of my reveal wheel rectangle. Now I'm ready to assemble my little whale here. So I flipped him over and I'm using this black rectangular piece that will fill in his eyes and his mouth. Then of course I have his little belly. I cut this little belly from Dolphin cardstock. I also have those cute little pink cheeks up there. I cut those from Ballet Slippers cardstock. I'm just adding a small dot of glue. I'll pick each one up with my pick up pokey tool and drop them into place. How cute is that? And then for his flippers, I need to trim off part of that square because we're not making an actual box and it's taller than his head. So I'm just going to trim this off right above the top of his flippers. Now you could have his flippers going up, you could have them going down. Either way, I decided for them to turn up on mine so that they popped up above the waves. And then I'm just layering that on the back. You can actually bend them a little bit too, so you can see what it looks like if they're down. I was trying to decide which way I wanted it to be. His little tail is going to wiggle like that. And I decided up was a little more happy. So I'm going to stick that down and just kind of fold on the fold lines and they'll kind of pop up and give a little dimension. Now I'm going to do something a little different since I'm not making a traditional reveal wheel. I want to put a hole in my panel. So I'm using the template for the semicircle add-on to mark where the center is. And then I just have a really thick piece of craft foam and I'm using the pokey side of my pickup pokey tool to create a hole. I'm going to do the same thing for his tail right there in the center. And I'll just make a hole with that pokey tool there as well. I'm going to have my brad go through all of these pieces because I want them to move all together. So this is going to line up just like that, and we're going to have it rotate in that semicircle window. Now for the pieces at the bottom, I want to cut some little waves. So I'm going to tape my tail in place with some removable tape, kind of lay my little whale where I want him to be so I know how high to cut my waves. You want to make sure that he's up high enough that he's going to cover up the brad that we use for the tail. So I'm going to grab my stitched wavy borders. I'm going to use the big one. I want the center to dip down so you see his little belly there. So I'm just going to line that up about where I want it to be. For this layer, it doesn't matter quite so much because we're going to layer another piece on top of it. And you're going to see here, I did cut it a little bit shorter than I probably wanted it to be. So there you can see my whale is floating a little bit, so I'll just shift that gingham up a little bit when I glue it to my card. But I will have a piece in front, which is what I'm doing here. I thought about using the next smallest of that stitched wavy border, but decided I wanted to use that same one with the big waves, but just switch up where they are. So you can see I have a hill in the middle versus a valley. I'm just going to line that up as well, hold it in place with a little bit of low tack tape, and I'll run this through my die cut machine, and then I'll have two layers of waves. And you can see this will cover up that little bit at the bottom where I lifted that back layer up a little bit. Now for my sentiment, I'm using the Get Well Before and Afters stamp set just for the sentiment because there is a sentiment in there that says Get Whale. soon, which goes with my cute little whale. I'm going to line those stamps up. They're on rectangular bases, so I can just butt them right up against each other, pick them up with my acrylic block, and I am going to stamp them on this little sentiment banner. Now, this is cut from Sunset Orange cardstock, and I'm going to white emboss. So I treated it with my anti-static powder tool. I'm stamping with clear embossing ink, and you can see I've stamped it to the right. I'm going to add that white embossing powder on there. Then I can heat this up with my heat tool till I get that melted, nice, bright white sentiment. And I like to heat it from the back a little bit, and then flip over to the front and make sure it's nice and melted. Now I'm going to let that cool just for a minute because I don't want to mess up my embossing, and then I will realign my die for the sentiment banner, and we're going to trim off the left side so we get a shorter banner that fits our card perfectly. I love that extra pop of color down there at the bottom. Now I wanted to create some seaweed, and one of my favorite ways to create seaweed is actually to use the bayou backdrop and flip it upside down and have these little growy things come up from below. And I'm using some algae cardstock to just cut out both sides of this, and I'm going to trim it down. And what's nice about this is they're all stuck together because of that border at the bottom. So these are going to go behind my front wave layer, so they're going to be tucked and sandwiched between the two. I'm just kind of checking them out. That one was a little too tall, so I'm going to trim that off. Better to have too many, but you could always add more if you needed to as well, because all that's going to be hidden behind the wave. Now I do want a couple little images. I want the little bird from Get Well Soon, and then I want the tiny little Band-Aid and the tiny little bottle of pills from the Get Well Before and Afters. So I'm just stamping those in some jet black ink, and I'm going to color them with my alcohol markers. Now typically I color this little bird yellow almost all the time, but this is a whale in an ocean scene, so I decided to go with some warm gray colors to mimic the colors of a seagull. I know this isn't a seagull, but these colors seem to fit better than a yellow bird would fit. That feels more like a chicken to me, and I wanted this obviously to be a seabird of some kind. So I just have W3, W1, and I used a little W5 right down at the bottom. Then I'm coloring my little Band-Aid and just the tiniest bit of shading. And then for my pill bottle, I want a teal label just for some color. I always color that little heart in red. I'll go back to that E000 for the top, which was what I used on the bird's hat. And then instead of a bright orange peel bottle, I pulled out these oranges that are shrimp and salmon. And I think that fits very well with this card. Of course, I will grab the coordinating dies for all these little images, line them up, hold them in place with a little bit of low tack tape, and trim them out. So here they are. And I need to finish this off by stamping something on the little bird's hat. And I decided to go with the heart and stamp that in some lobster ink. So now we're ready to assemble our card. So we're going to assemble this the same way we would a reveal wheel, but a little bit different. So I'm grabbing my brad, and we're going to build it from the back to the front. So we want to go through the small circle first, then the large circle. Then usually that's where we stop. But for this card, we're going to go through the hole we created on the panel, and then also the tail, which I hadn't made that quite big enough, so I'm going to use that pokey end of my pokey tool just to make it a little bigger so that brad will fit through there. So now all 4 of those pieces are held together with the brad, and we can open it up. But we need to attach our tail to the wheel. So I'm going to grab a foam square to do that. And at first I just stuck it on here, but I realized I should have stuck it on the tail because you could kind of see it just a tiny little bit. So I'm just going to pull it off and stick it to the tail to make sure it's hidden. This will stick to the wheel. Now the wheel and the tail move as one. Look how fun that is. I just think that's so cute. So for the whale's body, we want to make sure we avoid the tail and that semicircle. We don't want any foam squares there. So I have foam squares on the 4 corners. And I actually took those ones at the top and just moved them down just slightly so that they did not impede that semicircle. That's where you want to avoid. And of course, you can kind of put it in place, make sure it's working right. And if it's good, you can just kind of give it a little more pressure and stick it down for certain. Now for my waves, I want to start with the back wave. And I want this to be popped up just like my whale. And then I'll layer the other pieces on top. So I'm going to flip this over and add some foam squares. You want to make sure you avoid the whale. So I put those on both sides. I'm going to scoot them over just a little bit. So now that whale will tuck in that void kind of in the middle. And then I'm going to use some foam tape for the bottom so that it's fully supported all the way across the bottom. And I actually added 2 more foam squares right on those little corners so nothing got bent. And then I can pop this into place right up there at my whale. Now for the piece on the front, I'm going to add a little foam strip on the bottom so we can support the bottom of that piece. And then the rest of it, I am just going to glue directly down, but not until I get my seaweed on there. So I need to do that first. I need to get that placed on there. And what I'm going to do for that is I'm just going to add a little bit of adhesive runner onto the back, and then I can glue down this seaweed. So I'll just line that up where I want it to be. I love that we have that little border piece to hold all those little seaweed pieces together. Just checking that placement, and it's easy to move around with that tape runner. And then I can add this whole thing to the bottom and of course pull off that liner paper for that little strip at the very, very bottom. And now this ocean is really coming together. Of course, we have our sentiment and we have our little stamped images that I colored and cut out earlier. For the band-aid, I'm putting it on his tail, and the reason why is because I'm making this card for my mom who just had knee replacement surgery. Sadly, a whale doesn't have any knees, so we're gonna have to put it on the tail because obviously that surgery did not happen on the fins. Now for my little bird, I thought it was a little funny to stick it down in the water like it was swimming, but I like it sitting on the banner better. But I had always intended for the little pill bottle to kind of be caught in the seaweed some way. Now I almost stuck this directly down, but I wanted it to have a little bit of pop off the background. So I pulled out my thin foam squares. These are half the thickness of a regular foam square. So it's going to give us just the slightest bit of dimension. You could also cut a couple strips of cardstock and glue it on the back to have it popped up just a little bit as well. But that's going to allow us to put some of these thin foam squares on the back of the bird as well and have it popped up some too, so that everything on the bottom isn't so flat. And now that everything down there is in place, I am going to grab my glue tube and just tack down a couple of those pieces of seaweed so that they don't pop up and get caught and get ripped off. Now the top of this is looking a little empty, so I pulled out some puffy cloud dyes and some spiffy speckles paper. This is a great time to use that B side that's the white with the colored speckles. And I'm going to cut out a couple clouds. And I'm just going to arrange them in the sky. We want to be sure that we kind of avoid our part that's moving. We're going to trim these off so they're all going off the edge of my rectangle. And once I kind of figure out where I want them placed, I'll just add them with a little bit of adhesive. Now this one is going to overlap a little bit. You just want to make sure that it doesn't stick to the wheel. Because that tail's popped up with some foam, it will go in front of the cloud. And then I can just trim off the excess. And look, everything is still working perfectly. So let's finish up this card by putting this piece of spiffy speckles paper that's cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 onto my card base. This will give me that aqua border around my panel. And then we need to pop this whole panel up with foam. Now we want to start by securing just that small circle, just like we would with a regular reveal wheel because it needs to move. Then for all our other foam, we just need to avoid the wheel. So I'm adding some strips along the bottom. I have some squares to add to the corners and make sure everything's supported, but that wheel still moves freely. Then I'm just going to pop this on there and we are ready for our finishing touches. Now for the arrow to tell the recipient to move the wheel, I'm just going to draw it in with a pin because I need the arrow to point in both directions and most of the stamps only point one way. I also grabbed my white paint pen and I'm adding some white highlights to my whale, which I think really makes him stand out nicely, especially since he's just colored cardstock. I added some little dots to his cheeks, little dots to his tail, and some little freckles above those cheeks too, which I think is really cute. Then of course we need our glitter, and I added just a little bit to some of those leaves of the algae or the seaweed. You could also cut the little individual leaves that are part of the bayou backdrop if you wanted more than one color. And I'm adding some glitter to the clouds. Of course, I wanted some more pops of color, so I have those little hearts from Hearts and Stars Skinny Tag. These are cut from raspberry cardstock, so they're a little darker. And I'm just sprinkled those around. I'm making sure I don't glue anything to that circle again. But I love that they're kind of tucked into the seaweed and they're kind of floating up here with my whale. And of course, I will add glitter to all those hearts too because hearts always need glitter. And then this card is all finished. I think it turned out super cute. I love using that reveal wheel to make the tail move back and forth, and I hope my mom really likes this card. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.